Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who share our blood. I learned this painful truth when my own brother tried to steal the home I'd worked years to afford. The home that represented every extra shift, every promotion, every sacrifice I'd made since graduating college. I never imagined Eric would betray me like this. But looking back, maybe the signs were always there, hidden beneath years of excuses I made for him. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Collins, and this is the story of how my brother moved into my house while I was away on a work assignment, then had the audacity to demand I leave when I returned. What he didn't count on was that I keep meticulous records, especially when it comes to my mortgage payments. Growing up in Westfield, a small town just outside Charlotte, Eric and I were never the closest siblings. With a 4-year age gap between us, we existed in different worlds. While I was the responsible one who studied hard and followed rules, Eric charmed his way through life, depending on his natural charisma to get what he wanted. Our parents, especially our mom, enabled his behavior, always finding excuses for his shortcomings. "He's just finding his way," Mom would say after. Eric dropped out of community college for the 3rd time. "Everyone blooms at their own pace," Dad would echo, writing another check to cover Eric's overdue rent. I took a different approach to life. After graduating with my business degree, I moved to Durham and secured an entry-level position at Meridian Consulting. For 6 years, I lived in a tiny apartment, taking on extra projects and working weekends. When my colleagues splurged on tropical vacations or designer clothes, I contributed to my savings account, determined to achieve the stability our parents never quite managed. At 30, my discipline paid off. I had enough for a down payment on a charming 2-bedroom Craftsman with a wraparound porch in a quiet neighborhood. The moment I signed those mortgage papers, a weight lifted from my shoulders. This was mine, the product of my hard work, my sacrifices, my determination. "I can't believe you bought a house all by yourself," my mother said during her first visit, pride mingling with surprise in her voice. "And it's so lovely." "Thanks, Mom. I've been saving for years." "Your brother should see this. Maybe it would motivate him." I nodded, though privately I doubted it. Eric, now 34, had cycled through countless jobs and relationships. Nothing seemed to stick. For 2 years, I poured love into that house, planting a garden in the backyard, painting each room, and furnishing it with carefully selected pieces that reflected my personality. My neighbor, Sophia Washington, quickly became a close friend. A retired teacher in her 60s, she often invited me over for coffee and homemade scones. "You've done wonders with that place," Sophia told me one afternoon as we sat on her porch. "It's gone from the eyesore of the neighborhood to the jewel." Life felt good, stable. Then everything changed with a single phone call. "Becca, it's me." Eric's voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable. "Eric, what's wrong?" "Jennifer left, took everything. I don't have anywhere to go." Jennifer was Eric's girlfriend of 3 years. Their relationship had always seemed volatile to me, but he insisted they were perfect for each other. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously. "Are you okay?" "Not really. I've been staying at a motel, but I can't afford it much longer. I lost my job last month and—" "You lost your job? Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I was embarrassed, okay? I thought I'd find something else quickly." The silence stretched between us. I knew what was coming next. "Becca, I hate to ask, but could I stay with you? Just for a few weeks until I get back on my feet?" I hesitated. Eric and I had never lived together as adults, and his track record for responsibility wasn't great. But he was my brother, and he sounded genuinely desperate. "All right," I finally agreed, "but just for a few weeks." "You're a lifesaver, Becca. I promise I won't be any trouble." 2 days later, Eric arrived at my doorstep with 2 suitcases and a forced smile. I showed him the guest room and established some basic ground rules. Clean up after yourself, contribute to groceries when possible, and respect my space and belongings. For the first few weeks, things went surprisingly well. Eric kept the house tidy, cooked dinner occasionally, and even helped with yard work. We fell into an unexpected rhythm, sharing meals and watching movies together in the evenings. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement was good for both of us. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. Ms. Collins? My boss, Mrs. Reynolds, called me into her office one Monday morning. How would you feel about heading our new project in Seattle? My heart raced. This was the promotion I'd been working toward for years. It's a 3-month assignment, she continued. You'd be overseeing the entire West Coast expansion. It's a big responsibility, but I think you're ready. I'd be honored, I replied without hesitation. It wasn't until I was driving home that I remembered Eric. I couldn't just leave him alone in my house for 3 months, could I? But I also couldn't pass up this career opportunity. When I raised the subject that evening, Eric immediately assured me it wouldn't be a problem. Are you kidding? This is fantastic news, Becca. You deserve this promotion. But what about? I gestured vaguely around the house. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of the place while you're gone. Water the plants, collect the mail, keep everything running smoothly. Are you sure? 3 months is a long time. Positive. Consider it my way of paying you back for letting me stay. Plus, I just had a promising interview yesterday. Relief washed over me. Maybe Eric really had changed. Maybe hitting rock bottom had been the wake-up call he needed. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for my assignment, creating detailed instructions for Eric about house maintenance, bill payments, though all of mine were on autopay, and emergency contacts. I introduced him to Sophia, asking her to keep an eye on things. Don't worry about a thing, Sophia assured me. I'll make sure your brother behaves himself. The day before my departure, I gave Eric a spare key and the security system code. Remember, the mortgage payment comes out automatically on the 15th of each month, but I've set up all the utilities to be paid from my account too. Got it. Seriously, Becca, stop worrying. Everything will be fine. I left for Seattle the next morning, excited about my new project and reassured about my home. The first month passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights at the office. I called Eric weekly, and everything seemed fine back home. He mentioned he was still job hunting but had a few promising leads. During our video calls, I could see my house looked clean and undisturbed in the background. Midway through the second month, our communications became less frequent. Eric stopped answering my calls regularly, claiming he was busy with interviews or social obligations. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, ending our conversations quickly. Is everything okay there? I asked during one particularly brief call. Everything's great, he replied too quickly. How's Seattle? Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I called Sophia, who reassured me that the house looked fine from the outside, though she mentioned she hadn't seen much of Eric lately. There have been quite a few visitors coming and going, she added, but I suppose he's making friends in the neighborhood. By the start of my 3rd month in Seattle, I was counting down the days until I could return home. The project was going exceptionally well, but I missed my space, my routine, my life in Durham. Then came the email that sent my world spiraling. From Durham County Tax Office. Subject, Property Tax Assessment Change Request. Dear Ms. Collins, we are writing regarding the request to change the mailing address for property tax statements for 145 Maple Street. Please confirm if you wish to proceed with this change of address from your current address to. The email listed an address I didn't recognize. I hadn't requested any changes to my property tax statements. Why would I? I read the email again, my stomach knotting with unease. Then I noticed something else. The new address belonged to a P.O. box registered to Eric Collins. My hands shaking, I called the tax office. Yes, we received the request. About 3 weeks ago, the clerk confirmed. It was submitted online with your property ID number and the last 4 digits of your social security number as verification. Information Eric could easily access from my files at home. Next, I called my bank. Sure enough, there had been an attempt to change the mailing address for my mortgage statements too, though thankfully that required more verification than the tax office. Panic rising, I called Eric. No answer. I texted. Nothing. Finally, I called Sophia. "Rebecca, dear, I've been meaning to call you," she said, her voice tight with concern. "There's been a lot of activity at your house lately, moving trucks yesterday. I thought maybe you'd asked Eric to rearrange some furniture, but it seemed excessive." "Moving trucks?" My voice sounded distant, foreign to my own ears. "Yes, and he's had the locks changed. The locksmith came last week. I thought it was strange, but Eric told me you'd requested it after losing your key in Seattle." I had never lost my key. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sophia, I'm coming home. Today. Could you keep an eye on the house until I get there?" "Of course, dear. Is everything all right?" "I don't think so." I booked the first flight back to Durham, requested emergency leave from my project, and spent the 6-hour journey imagining increasingly worse scenarios. What had Eric done to my house? Why change the locks? Why try to redirect my mail? It was nearly midnight when my taxi pulled up to my address. The house looked different somehow. New curtains hung in the windows. The porch light I always left on was dark. And was that a different color on the front door? The navy blue I'd carefully selected had been replaced with a garish red. My key, as expected, didn't work in the new lock. I knocked, then pounded on the door. Finally, lights flickered on inside, and Eric opened the door, surprise evident on his face. "Becca, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? This is my house, Eric. Why did you change the locks?" He stepped outside, closing the door. Behind him, "Look, you're obviously tired from your trip. Why don't we talk about this tomorrow?" "No, we're talking now. Why did you try to change my mailing address for tax and mortgage statements? What's going on?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Look, I've been thinking. This house is way too big for just you. And since I've been taking care of it these past months..." 3 months, I corrected sharply. "Not even that." "Right, 3 months. Anyway, I've really settled in here, made it my own space, and I was thinking maybe we could make this arrangement permanent." I stared at him, incredulous. "Permanent? Eric, this is my house. I own it. I pay the mortgage." "About that." He shifted uncomfortably. "I've been talking to a lawyer. Since I've been the sole occupant and have been maintaining the property, I might have some rights here. Especially since we're family." "You can't be serious." "I am. And honestly, Becca, you're doing great in Seattle. Your career is taking off there. Why not just stay? You could easily afford a nice place on the West Coast with your new salary." The audacity stunned me. "Let me in, Eric. Now." "I don't think that's a good idea. You're clearly upset. Why don't you get a hotel for the night? We can discuss this when you've calmed down." I pushed past him, entering my own home only to stop short in the hallway. Everything had changed. My carefully selected furniture was gone, replaced by pieces I didn't recognize. The walls I'd painted a soft sage green were now a stark white. Photos of me and my friends had been removed, replaced by artwork I'd never seen before. And there, lounging on an unfamiliar couch in my living room, was a woman I'd never met. "Oh," she exclaimed, standing quickly. "You must be Rebecca. I'm Megan." "What have you done to my house?" I whispered, turning to Eric. "Our house now," he corrected. "Megan moved in last month. We're really making it our own." "Get out," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage and betrayal coursing through me. "Both of you. Get out of my house now." Eric's expression hardened. "No, I've established residency here. You can't just throw me out. And frankly, after all I've done to improve this place, I think I deserve to stay." "Improve? You've destroyed everything that made it mine." "I've made it better," he insisted. "More modern. Your style was always so boring." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," he shrugged. "I have proof I've been living here for months. I've received mail here. I know the neighbors. I've even paid some of the utilities recently. With my money. You can't prove that. But I could, and I would." I left that night, shaking with fury and heartbreak, and checked into a nearby hotel. The next morning, I called Uncle Jack, our father's brother, and the only family member who had always treated Eric and me equally. "He did what?" Uncle Jack's disbelief matched my own. "Rebecca, this is outrageous." "I don't know what to do, Uncle Jack. He won't leave. He's changed everything. He even has a girlfriend living there now." "Do you have documentation? Proof of ownership, mortgage payments, that sort of thing?" "Everything. I keep meticulous records." "Good. Then we're going to fight this." Over the next week, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Mortgage statements, property tax records, utility bills in my name, and most damning of all, bank records showing that every single payment had come from my account. I hired a lawyer, who confirmed what I already knew. Eric had no legal claim to my house, regardless of how long he had stayed there or what improvements he claimed to have made. We also discovered that Eric had attempted to forge my signature on several documents, including a quitclaim deed that would have transferred ownership to him. Fortunately, his forgery skills weren't as refined as his manipulation tactics, and the documents had been flagged for verification. 2 weeks after my return, we confronted Eric with a formal eviction notice and evidence of his attempted fraud. My lawyer made it clear that if he didn't vacate the premises within 48 hours, we would pursue criminal charges. "You wouldn't do that to your own brother," Eric scoffed, though I could see the first flickers of uncertainty in his eyes. "You tried to steal my house," I replied calmly. "What wouldn't you do to your own sister?" He and Megan left the next day, taking only their personal belongings and leaving my house in disarray. The furniture they'd brought was cheap and already falling apart. The paint job was sloppy, with drips and uneven patches. Even the new red door had been installed incorrectly, the hinges loose and squeaking. The physical mess was nothing compared to the emotional damage. Every corner of my home had been violated, every personal touch erased. It no longer felt like mine. "It'll take time," Sophia told me gently as she helped me clean up. "But you'll reclaim your space. Make it yours again." Uncle Jack stayed for a week, helping me repaint and replace what had been damaged or removed. "Your brother has always taken the easy route," he said one evening as we sat on the newly restored porch. "He looks for shortcuts instead of putting in the work." "I just don't understand why he thought he could get away with it," I admitted. "Because people like Eric count on others not standing up to them. They prey on kindness and family loyalty." "But you did stand up to him, Rebecca. You fought back." In the months that followed, I gradually rebuilt my sense of security and ownership. I installed a comprehensive security system, changed all my passwords, and set up fraud alerts on my accounts. The promotion in Seattle was still mine if I wanted it, but I chose to stay in Durham, unwilling to abandon the home I had fought so hard to keep. Eric tried to contact me several times, his messages alternating between half-hearted apologies and veiled accusations that I had overreacted. I maintained my distance, the trust between us irreparably broken. 1 year after the incident, I hosted a housewarming party, celebrating the complete restoration of my home and the renewal of my spirit. Sophia, Uncle Jack, and my closest friends gathered on my wraparound porch, raising glasses to new beginnings. To Rebecca, Uncle Jack toasted, who reminds us that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. As the evening wound down and my guests departed, I sat alone, on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. My house stood solid behind me, once again filled with carefully chosen furnishings, photographs of loved ones, and colors that brought me joy. The betrayal still stung when I allowed myself to dwell on it. Eric was my brother, my blood. But I had learned a valuable lesson through the pain. True family isn't just about shared DNA. It's about respect, honesty, and mutual support. Eric had failed on all counts. More importantly, I had discovered my own strength. The Rebecca who had naively handed over her house key was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her worth and would fight to protect what was hers. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. But in healing those wounds, we often find parts of ourselves we never knew existed, reserves of courage, determination, and resilience that can weather any storm. My brother thought he could take advantage of my kindness. He forgot who paid the mortgage. But more than that, he underestimated the woman whose name was on the deed. That was his biggest mistake. Thanks, Mom. I've been saving for years. Your brother should see this. Maybe it would motivate him. I nodded, though privately I doubted it. Eric, now 34, had cycled through countless jobs and relationships. Nothing seemed to stick. For 2 years, I poured love into that house, planting a garden in the backyard, painting each room, and furnishing it with carefully selected pieces that reflected my personality. My neighbor, Sophia Washington, quickly became a close friend. A retired teacher in her 60s, she often invited me over for coffee and homemade scones. "You've done wonders with that place," Sophia told me one afternoon as we sat on her porch. "It's gone from the eyesore of the neighborhood to the jewel. Life felt good, stable." Then everything changed with a single phone call. "Becca, it's me." Eric's voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable. "Eric? What's wrong?" "Jennifer left, took everything. I don't have anywhere to go." Jennifer was Eric's girlfriend of 3 years. Their relationship had always seemed volatile to me, but he insisted they were perfect for each other. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously. "Are you okay?" "Not really. I've been staying at a motel, but I can't afford it much longer. I lost my job last month and—" "You lost your job? Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I was embarrassed, okay? I thought I'd find something else quickly." The silence stretched between us. I knew what was coming next. "Becca, I hate to ask, but could I stay with you? Just for a few weeks until I get back on my feet." I hesitated. Eric and I had never lived together as adults, and his track record for responsibility wasn't great. But he was my brother, and he sounded genuinely desperate. All right, I finally agreed. But just for a few weeks. "You're a lifesaver, Becca. I promise I won't be any trouble." 2 days later, Eric arrived at my doorstep with 2 suitcases and a forced smile. I showed him the guest room and established some basic ground rules. Clean up after yourself, contribute to groceries when possible, and respect my space and belongings. For the first few weeks, things went surprisingly well. Eric kept the house, tidy cooked dinner occasionally, and even helped with yard work. We fell into an unexpected rhythm, sharing meals and watching movies together in the evenings. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement was good for both of us. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. "Ms. Collins?" My boss, Mrs. Reynolds, called me into her office one Monday morning. "How would you feel about heading our new project in Seattle?" My heart raced. This was the promotion I'd been working toward for years. "It's a 3-month assignment," she continued. You'd be overseeing the entire West Coast expansion. It's a big responsibility, but I think you're ready. I'd be honored, I replied without hesitation. It wasn't until I was driving home that I remembered Eric. I couldn't just leave him alone in my house for 3 months, could I? But I also couldn't pass up this career opportunity. When I raised the subject that evening, Eric immediately assured me it wouldn't be a problem. Are you kidding? This is fantastic news, Becca. You deserve this promotion. But what about? First, I gestured vaguely around the house. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of the place while you're gone. Water the plants, collect the mail, keep everything running smoothly. Are you sure? 3 months is a long time. Positive. Consider it my way of paying you back for letting me stay. Plus, I just had a promising interview yesterday. Relief washed over me. Maybe Eric really had changed. Maybe hitting rock bottom had been the wake-up call he needed. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for my assignment, creating detailed instructions for Eric about house maintenance, bill payments, though all of mine were on autopay, and emergency contacts. I introduced him to Sophia, asking her to keep an eye on things. Don't worry about a thing, Sophia assured me. I'll make sure your brother behaves himself. The day before my departure, I gave Eric a spare key and the security system code. Remember, the mortgage payment comes out automatically on the 15th of each month, but I've set up all the utilities to be paid from my account too. Got it. Seriously, Becca, stop worrying. Everything will be fine. I left for Seattle the next morning, excited about my new project and reassured about my home. The first month passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights at the office. I called Eric weekly, and everything seemed fine back home. He mentioned he was still job hunting, but had a few promising leads. During our video calls, I could see my house looked clean and undisturbed in the background. Midway through the second month, our communications became less frequent. Eric stopped answering my calls regularly, claiming he was busy with interviews or social obligations. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, ending our conversations quickly. Is everything okay there? I asked during one particularly brief call. Everything's great, he replied too quickly. How's Seattle? Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I called Sophia, who reassured me that the house looked fine from the outside, though she mentioned she hadn't seen much of Eric lately. There have been quite a few visitors coming and going, she added. But I suppose he's making friends in the neighborhood. By the start of my 3rd month in Seattle, I was counting down the days until I could return home. The project was going exceptionally well, but I missed my space, my routine, my life in Durham. Then came the email that sent my world spiraling. From Durham County Tax Office, subject, Property Tax Assessment Change Request. Dear Ms. Collins, we are writing regarding the request to change the mailing address for property tax statements for 145 Maple Street. Please confirm if you wish to proceed with this change of address from your current address to. The email listed an address I didn't recognize. I hadn't requested any changes to my property tax statements. Why would I? I read the email again, my stomach knotting with unease. Then I noticed something else. The new address belonged to a P.O. box registered to Eric Collins. My hands shaking, I called the tax office. Yes, we received the request about 3 weeks ago, the clerk confirmed. It was submitted online with your property ID number and the last 4 digits of your Social Security number as verification. Information Eric could easily access from my files at home. Next, I called my bank. Sure enough, there had been an attempt to change the mailing address for my mortgage statements too, though thankfully that required more verification than the tax office. Panic rising, I called Eric. No answer. I texted. Nothing. Finally, I called Sophia. Rebecca, dear, I've been meaning to call you, she said, her voice tight with concern. There's been a lot of activity at your house lately. Moving trucks yesterday. I thought maybe you'd asked Eric to rearrange some furniture, but it seemed excessive. Moving trucks? My voice sounded distant, foreign to my own ears. Yes, and he's had the locks changed. The locksmith came last week. I thought it was strange, but Eric told me you'd requested it after losing your key in Seattle. I had never lost my key. Sophia, I'm coming home. Today. Could you keep an eye on the house until I get there? Of course, dear. Is everything all right? I don't think so. I booked the first flight back to Durham, requested emergency leave from my project, and spent the 6-hour journey imagining increasingly worse scenarios. What had Eric done to my house? Why change the locks? Why try to redirect my mail? It was nearly midnight when my taxi pulled up to my address. The house looked different somehow. New curtains hung in the windows. The porch light I always left on was dark. And was that a different color on the front door? The navy blue I'd carefully selected had been replaced with a garish red. My key, as expected, didn't work in the new lock. I knocked, then pounded on the door. Finally, lights flickered on inside, and Eric opened the door, surprise evident on his face. Becca? What are you doing here? What am I doing here? This is my house, Eric. Why did you change the locks? He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Look, you're obviously tired from your trip. Why don't we talk about this tomorrow? No, we're talking now. Why did you try to change my mailing address for tax and mortgage statements? What's going on? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Look, I've been thinking. This house is way too big for just you. And since I've been taking care of it these past months— 3 months, I corrected sharply. Not even that. Right, 3 months. Anyway, I've really settled in here, made it my own space, and I was thinking maybe we could make this arrangement permanent. I stared at him, incredulous. Permanent? Eric, this is my house. I own it. I pay the mortgage. About that. He shifted uncomfortably. I've been talking to a lawyer. Since I've been the sole occupant and have been maintaining the property, I might have some rights here, especially since we're family. You can't be serious. I am. And honestly, Becca, you're doing great in Seattle. Your career is taking off there. Why not just stay? You could easily afford a nice place on the West Coast with your new salary. The audacity stunned me. Let me in, Eric. Now. I don't think that's a good idea. You're clearly upset. Why don't you get a hotel for the night? We can discuss this when you've calmed down. I pushed past him, entering my own home only to stop short in the hallway. Everything had changed. My carefully selected furniture was gone, replaced by pieces I didn't recognize. The walls I'd painted a soft sage green were now a stark white. Photos of me and my friends had been removed, replaced by artwork I'd never seen before. And there, lounging on an unfamiliar couch in my living room, was a woman I'd never met. "Oh," she exclaimed, standing quickly. "You must be Rebecca. I'm Megan." "What have you done to my house?" I whispered, turning to Eric. "Our house now," he corrected. "Megan moved in last month. We're really making it our own." "Get out," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage and betrayal coursing through me. "Both of you, get out of my house now." Eric's expression hardened. "No, I've established residency here. You can't just throw me out. And frankly, after all I've done to improve this place, I think I deserve to stay." "Improve? You've destroyed everything that made it mine." "I've made it better," he insisted. "More modern. Your style was always so boring." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," he shrugged. "I have proof I've been living here for months. I've received mail here. I know the neighbors. I've even paid some of the utilities recently. With my money. You can't prove that, but I could, and I would." I left that night, shaking with fury and heartbreak, and checked into a nearby hotel. The next morning, I called Uncle Jack, our father's brother, and the only family member who had always treated Eric and me equally. He did what? Uncle Jack's disbelief matched my own. Rebecca, this is outrageous. I don't know what to do. Uncle Jack. He won't leave. He's changed everything. He even has a girlfriend living there now. Do you have documentation? Proof of ownership? Mortgage payments? That sort of thing? Everything. I keep meticulous records. Good. Then we're going to fight this. Over the next week, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Mortgage statements, property tax records, utility bills in my name, and most damning of all, bank records showing that every single payment had come from my account. I hired a lawyer who confirmed what I already knew. Eric had no legal claim to my house, regardless of how long he had stayed there or what improvements he claimed to have made. We also discovered that Eric had attempted to forge my signature on several documents, including a quitclaim deed that would have transferred ownership to him. Fortunately, his forgery skills weren't as refined as his manipulation tactics, and the documents had been flagged for verification. 2 weeks after my return, we confronted Eric with a formal eviction notice and evidence of his attempted fraud. My lawyer made it clear that if he didn't vacate the premises within 48 hours, we would pursue criminal charges. You wouldn't do that to your own brother, Eric scoffed, though I could see the first flickers of uncertainty in his eyes. You tried to steal my house, I replied calmly. What wouldn't you do to your own sister? He and Megan left the next day, taking only their personal belongings and leaving my house in disarray. The furniture they'd brought was cheap and already falling apart. The paint job was sloppy, with drips and uneven patches. Even the new red door had been installed incorrectly, the hinges loose and squeaking. The physical mess was nothing compared to the emotional damage. Every corner of my home had been violated, every personal touch erased. It no longer felt like mine. It'll take time, Sophia told me gently as she helped me clean up. But you'll reclaim your space. Make it yours again. Uncle Jack stayed for a week, helping me repaint and replace what had been damaged or removed. Your brother has always taken the easy route, he said one evening as we sat on the newly restored porch. He looks for shortcuts instead of putting in the work. I just don't understand why he thought he could get away with it, I admitted. Because people like Eric count on others not standing up to them. They prey on kindness and family loyalty. But you did stand up to him, Rebecca. You fought back. In the months that followed, I gradually rebuilt my sense of security and ownership. I installed a comprehensive security system, changed all my passwords, and set up fraud alerts on my accounts. The promotion in Seattle was still mine if I wanted it, but I chose to stay in Durham, unwilling to abandon the home I had fought so hard to keep. Eric tried to contact me several times, his messages alternating between half-hearted apologies and veiled accusations that I had overreacted. I maintained my distance, the trust between us irreparably broken. 1 year after the incident, I hosted a housewarming party, celebrating the complete restoration of my home and the renewal of my spirit. Sophia, Uncle Jack, and my closest friends gathered on my wraparound porch, raising glasses to new beginnings. To Rebecca, Uncle Jack toasted, who reminds us that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. As the evening wound down and my guests departed, I sat alone, on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. My house stood solid behind me, once again filled with carefully chosen furnishings, photographs of loved ones, and colors that brought me joy. The betrayal still stung when I allowed myself to dwell on it. Eric was my brother, my blood. But I had learned a valuable lesson through the pain. True family isn't just about shared DNA. It's about respect, honesty, and mutual support. Eric had failed on all counts, More importantly, I had discovered my own strength. The Rebecca who had naively handed over her house key was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her worth and would fight to protect what was hers. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. But in healing those wounds, we often find parts of ourselves we never knew existed. Reserves of courage, determination, and resilience that can weather any storm. My brother thought he could take advantage of my kindness. He forgot who paid the mortgage. But more than that, he underestimated the woman whose name was on the deed. That was his biggest mistake. The rebuilding process was more difficult than I'd anticipated. Beyond the physical repairs, there was an emotional toll that caught me off guard. For weeks after Eric's departure, I found myself checking the locks repeatedly before bed, startling at unexpected sounds, and feeling like an intruder in my own home. The violation of trust had left invisible scars that would take far longer to heal than any damage to the walls or floors. My first night back in the house after the formal eviction, I couldn't sleep. I'd changed the sheets, scrubbed every surface, but still felt Eric's presence lingering like a shadow. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, nursing a cup of tea that grew cold, wondering if I'd ever feel safe here again. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office to avoid going home. My colleagues noticed the change, but attributed it to my eagerness following the Seattle assignment. Only my manager, Marion, seemed to sense something deeper. "Rebecca," she said one evening, finding me still at my desk long after everyone else had left. "Is everything all right? You've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately." I hesitated, then found myself telling her everything. The words poured out in a rush: Eric's betrayal, the house, the legal battle that had drained both my savings and my spirit. Marion listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to outrage. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "First, take tomorrow off. You need a break. Second, have you considered therapy? What you experienced was trauma, Rebecca. It's not something you should have to process alone." I hadn't thought of it that way, as trauma. But Marion was right. The sense of violation, the sleepless nights, the hypervigilance, these were all symptoms of something deeper than simple stress. The next day, instead of going to work, I called a therapist recommended by Marion. Dr. Patel had a cancellation that afternoon, and within hours I was sitting in her office, nervously picking at the sleeve of my sweater as I recounted my story, yet again. "What you're experiencing is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation," Dr. Patel explained after listening attentively. "Your home represents safety, achievement, identity. When your brother violated that space, he didn't just take your furniture, he took your sense of security." "Will I ever feel safe there again?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "Yes," she said confidently. "But it will take time and intentional work. Reclaiming your space isn't just about new paint and furniture. It's about reclaiming your sense of control and ownership." Over the next few months, our weekly sessions became crucial to my healing process. Dr. Patel suggested practical steps: rearranging rooms to create new spatial memories, engaging all 5 senses to create positive associations, and establishing rituals that reinforced my ownership of the space. I started small. Each weekend, I tackled one room, not just cleaning or decorating, but truly transforming it. In the living room, where Eric and Megan had placed their gaudy furniture, I chose pieces that reflected my personality, comfortable but elegant, with subtle colors that brought me peace. I hung artwork that spoke to me, photographs of places I'd visited, moments that mattered. The kitchen, which had always been my favorite room, became a sanctuary again. I replaced the cheap utensils Eric had substituted for my carefully curated collection, restocked the pantry with ingredients for my favorite recipes, and spent Sunday afternoons baking bread, the scent filling every corner of the house, overlaying memories of violation with the comfort of creation. In my bedroom, I splurged on new linens, a luxury I'd rarely allowed myself before. The soft, high-thread count cotton became a symbol of self-care, a daily reminder that I deserved good things, that taking care of myself wasn't selfish but necessary. Sophia became an unexpected ally in this reclamation process. At 73, she had a lifetime of wisdom and a pragmatic approach to healing. "You know what helped me after Harold died?" she said one afternoon as we planted tulip bulbs along my front walkway. "Changing things. Not erasing him, but making choices he wouldn't have made. Purple curtains in the living room. He always hated purple. It was my way of saying, this is mine now." Inspired by her words, I painted my front door a rich, deep teal, a color Eric would have dismissed as too feminine. Every time I came home and saw that door, I felt a small spark of defiance and ownership. Uncle Jack called weekly, his gruff concern a constant reminder that family, real family, stood by you without conditions. He'd never had children of his own, and I realized he viewed me as the daughter he never had. "How's the fortress coming along?" he'd ask, his way of checking on my security measures without making me feel paranoid. "Fort Knox has nothing on me," I'd reply, grateful for his understanding. The security system he'd helped install was top of the line, with cameras, motion sensors, and immediate alerts to my phone. It was expensive, but the peace of mind was worth every penny. Knowing I could check on my home from anywhere at any time gradually eased the knot of anxiety that had taken up residence in my chest. 4 months after Eric left, I received a letter from him, an actual paper letter, not an email or text that could be easily deleted. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and nearly threw it away unopened. But Dr. Patel had been encouraging me to confront my feelings about Eric rather than avoid them, so with trembling hands, I broke the seal. The letter was surprisingly short. "Becca, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. What I did was unforgivable. There's no excuse. I've been in therapy for the past 2 months, trying to understand why I did what I did. It doesn't change anything, but I want you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I hurt you. You deserved better from me. I won't contact you again unless you want me to. Eric." I sat with the letter for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe him, to think that perhaps he was genuinely seeking help. Another part, the part that had been burned too many times, suspected this was just another manipulation tactic. I shared the letter with Dr. Patel at our next session. "What do you think?" I asked her. "Is this sincere?" "That's not for me to say," she replied carefully. "The more important question is, what do you need right now? Reconciliation? Distance? Something else entirely?" I considered her question seriously. "Distance," I finally said. "Maybe someday that will change, but right now, I need to focus on myself." "Then that's your answer." I never responded to Eric's letter, but I did keep it. Not as a tether to him, but as a reminder of how far I'd come, of the boundaries I'd learned to set and maintain. As summer turned to fall, I felt a shift within myself. The house was becoming mine again, room by room, memory by memory. I spent less time looking over my shoulder, more time looking forward. I invited friends over for dinner parties, hosted a book club in my renovated living room, and slowly, the rooms filled with new laughter, new conversations, new moments that had nothing to do with betrayal. One crisp October evening, I was deadheading, the late blooming roses in my garden when I noticed a moving truck parked in front of the house across the street. An elderly couple had lived there for years, but they'd moved to Florida months ago, and the property had been on the market ever since. Curious, I watched as a woman about my age directed movers carrying furniture from the truck. She had curly hair pulled into a messy bun and wore paint-splattered overalls. There was something immediately likable about her energy. The way she laughed with the movers, her animated gestures as she pointed out where things should go. Sophia emerged from her house, carrying what looked like a welcome basket. Always the neighborhood ambassador. I smiled, returning to my roses, but not before the new neighbor spotted me and waved enthusiastically. Later that evening, a knock at my door revealed both Sophia and the newcomer standing on my porch. "Rebecca, dear," Sophia beamed. "I want you to meet Grace Patterson. She just bought the Wilson place." "Hi, neighbor," Grace said, extending her hand. "Sophia's been singing your praises as the resident gardening expert. I noticed your roses from across the street. They're gorgeous." Grace was an art teacher at the local community college, recently divorced, and looking for a fresh start. She spoke quickly, punctuating her sentences with expressive hand gestures, and had an infectious laugh that made it impossible not to smile in response. "Sophia tells me you're quite the renovation expert," Grace said as we shared the bottle of wine she'd brought. "I've got big plans for that old house, but I'm more artist than carpenter. Any chance you'd be willing to share some wisdom?" I found myself agreeing to help, surprised by my own enthusiasm. For so long, my house had been associated with trauma and betrayal. The idea of helping someone else create a positive relationship with their space felt like another step in my own healing journey. Over the following weeks, Grace and I fell into an easy friendship. I helped her choose paint colors, explained the quirks of the neighborhood's aging plumbing, and held the ladder while she installed new light fixtures. In return, she painted a gorgeous mural in my dining room, a subtle landscape that changed with the light throughout the day. "You know what's funny?" Grace said one evening as we sat on my porch, admiring our handiwork on her latest project, a refurbished porch swing for her front yard. "When I bought this house, I was terrified. After the divorce, I thought I'd never feel at home anywhere again. But this place, it's starting to feel like mine." Her words resonated deeply with me. "I know exactly what you mean," I said, surprising myself by sharing a brief version of my own story. Grace listened intently, her artistic hands still for once. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Damn, Rebecca, I don't even have words. How did you find the strength to stay here after that?" I considered her question, looking around at my home, the teal door, the roses I'd nursed back from the brink after Eric's neglect, the windows that now reflected warmth instead of emptiness. "I couldn't let him take this from me," I said simply. "This house represents everything I've worked for. Leaving would have meant he won." Grace nodded slowly. "That's powerful. After my ex left, I couldn't bear to stay in our old house. Too many memories. I needed a clean slate. But there's something brave about reclaiming your space." "Different paths, same destination," I replied. We both found our way home. As winter approached, my home felt fully mine again. The security system became less about fear and more about practical protection. The new furniture and paint colors were no longer replacements for what Eric had destroyed, but expressions of my evolving taste. The garden, dormant now beneath a light dusting of frost, waited patiently for spring and new growth. At work, I accepted a promotion that recognized my successful management of the Seattle project. The new role came with more responsibility, but also more flexibility, including the option to work from home 2 days a week. My house, once a place I'd avoided, became my office, my sanctuary, my base for building the next phase of my career. Dr. Patel and I reduced our sessions to twice a month, then monthly. "You've done remarkable work, Rebecca," she told me at our last session before the holidays. "Not just in healing, but in growing. Many people would have sold the house, tried to outrun the memories. You chose to transform them instead." I thought about her words as I decorated for the holidays, my first truly peaceful Christmas since Eric's intrusion. I hung lights along the porch railing, placed an evergreen wreath on my teal door, and set up a small tree in the front window. Each ornament was chosen with care, many of them new, selected to reflect this chapter of my life rather than the past. Sophia, Grace, and I planned a neighborhood caroling event, followed by hot chocolate and cookies at my house. Uncle Jack drove down from Virginia, bringing his famous homemade eggnog and tall tales about his youth that grew more outlandish with each telling. On Christmas Eve, my home overflowed with friends, laughter, and music. Looking around at the faces gathered in my living room, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. These were my people, my chosen family, brought together under my roof not out of obligation, but genuine affection. Later, after the guests had departed and Uncle Jack had retired to the guest room, which I had completely redecorated, erasing all traces of Eric's brief residence, I sat alone by the Christmas tree, nursing a final cup of mulled wine. Outside, a gentle snow had begun to fall, muffling the world in pristine white. I thought about the year behind me, the betrayal, the fight, the reclamation, the rebuilding. I thought about the woman I'd been before Seattle, trusting to a fault, placing family obligation above self-protection. And I thought about the woman I'd become, stronger, wiser, more discerning, but still capable of opening my heart and my home to those who deserved entry. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was Grace, sending a photo of her Christmas tree with the caption, "First Christmas in my own home. Couldn't have done it without you, neighbor." I smiled, typing back, "Here's to new beginnings, and the homes we build, both the physical ones and the ones in our hearts." As I set my phone down, I realized something profound. This house was more than just walls and a roof, more than just an investment or an achievement. It was the physical manifestation of my journey, from vulnerability to strength, from victim to victor. Every nail I'd hammered, every wall I'd painted, every garden bed I'd planted had been an act of reclamation, not just of space, but of self. Eric had tried to take my house, but in fighting for it, I'd gained something far more valuable. An unshakable confidence in my own resilience. The knowledge that I could face betrayal and emerge not just surviving, but thriving. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the neighborhood in a blanket of possibility. Tomorrow would bring Uncle Jack's famous Christmas pancakes, phone calls with distant friends, perhaps an impromptu gathering with Sophia and Grace for leftover cookies, and conversation. But tonight, in this quiet moment of reflection, I lifted my wine glass in a silent toast to myself, to the journey I'd traveled and the home I'd fought for, both the one built of wood and brick and the one I'd constructed within my own heart. Both were mine, hard-won and precious, and no one could ever take them away again. Spring arrived with an explosion of color in my garden. The tulips I'd planted with Sophia months ago pushed through the soil in vibrant reds and purples, their upturned faces greeting the morning sun. The rose bushes, which had suffered under Eric's neglect, showed promising new growth after my careful winter pruning. Much like the garden, I too was blooming again, putting down deeper roots in this house that had weathered its own storm. My morning routine had evolved into something sacred: coffee on the porch swing, watching the neighborhood come alive. Sophia would wave as she collected her newspaper. Grace often jogged past with a cheerful greeting, and the family of cardinals that had nested in my maple tree provided a consistent soundtrack of chirps and calls. This particular Tuesday morning, I scrolled through my emails while enjoying my second cup of coffee. Among the usual work messages and promotional offers was one from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "Important Property Tax Delinquency. Notice." My stomach tightened instinctively. The last time I'd received unexpected correspondence about my property, it had been the start of Eric's attempted takeover. I clicked on the email with caution. The message claimed to be from the Durham County Tax Assessor's Office, stating my property taxes were delinquent and threatening a lien if payment wasn't made immediately. There was a link to view your tax statement and a phone number to call. Something felt off. I paid my property taxes through my mortgage escrow account. They should never be delinquent. And the email address, while similar to the county's domain, wasn't quite right. I forwarded the message to my lawyer with a quick note asking her to verify its legitimacy, then called the actual county tax office using the number from their official website, not the one in the email. "Ms. Collins, your property taxes are current," the clerk confirmed after checking my records. "We haven't sent any delinquency notices. This sounds like a scam. We've seen similar attempts recently." Relief washed over me, followed by a wave of suspicion. This wasn't a random phishing attempt. Someone had targeted me specifically. Someone who knew my name, address, and property ownership. Someone hoping I would panic and click without thinking. My lawyer called later that morning. "You were right to be cautious," she said. "That email was definitely fraudulent. If you'd clicked that link, it would have likely installed malware to capture your banking information or personal data." "Do you think—" I hesitated, not wanting to sound paranoid. "Could Eric be behind this?" Her silence spoke volumes. "It's possible," she finally replied. "The timing is interesting. Did you know your restraining order against him expires next week?" I hadn't realized. The 6-month order had been part of our settlement agreement after I'd discovered his attempts to forge my signature on property documents. The time had passed so quickly, wrapped up in rebuilding my life, that I'd lost track. "Would you like me to file for an extension?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Let me think about it. I'll call you tomorrow." That evening, I invited Grace and Sophia over for dinner. As we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, I shared my concerns about the email. "You think your brother is still trying to get your house?" Grace asked, her artist's hands gesturing expressively. "After everything that happened?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It seems outlandish, but so did his original plan." Sophia, always the voice of wisdom, set down her wine glass deliberately. "Rebecca, dear, what does your gut tell you?" I closed my eyes, listening to the inner voice I'd learned to trust through therapy. That I need to be vigilant but not fearful. That I can't live my life looking over my shoulder, but I also can't ignore potential threats. "Then that's your answer," Sophia said simply. "Prepare for the possibility, but don't let it consume you." Grace leaned forward, her expression serious for once. "You know we've got your back, right? This isn't like before? You're not facing this alone." Her words warmed me. She was right. The landscape had changed significantly since Eric's first attempt. I had a support system now, people who knew the situation and were watching out for me. I had legal documentation, security systems, and most importantly, I had shed the naive trust that had made me vulnerable before. The next day, I called my lawyer and asked her to file for a 3-month extension on the restraining order, not the full year she'd recommended. It was a compromise between caution and moving forward. I also asked her to send a cease and desist letter to Eric regarding any attempts to contact me or interfere with my property, electronic or otherwise. "I can't prove he sent that email," I told her, "but I want him to know I'm paying attention." With those practical protections in place, I turned my focus back to living rather than worrying. The Durham spring was too beautiful to waste on fear, and I had worked too hard to reclaim my joy to surrender it now. My professional life was thriving. The promotion I'd received after the Seattle project had led to even more responsibilities, and I'd recently been tapped to lead a new initiative focusing on sustainable business practices, a passion project I'd advocated for over the past year. My home office, once a spare bedroom, was now a well-designed space where I spent 2 days a week working remotely, surrounded by plants and natural light. Grace and I continued our weekend renovation projects, alternating between her house and mine. She'd taught me basic mosaic techniques, and together we'd created a stunning backsplash for my kitchen, incorporating bits of sea glass I'd collected during a weekend trip to the coast. In return, I'd helped her install floating shelves throughout her home to display her eclectic pottery collection. "We should start a business," Grace joked one Saturday as we admired our latest creation, a refurbished vintage sideboard that now held pride of place in my dining room. Two women and a hammer, specializing in therapeutic renovations for women reclaiming their spaces. The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it sounded. Several of Grace's friends, hearing about our weekend projects, had asked for help with their own homes. There seemed to be a growing awareness of the connection between physical space and emotional well-being, especially among women recovering from difficult relationships or major life transitions. "Maybe we could start with workshops," I suggested, surprised by my own enthusiasm. Weekend sessions teaching basic home repair and design skills, with a focus on empowerment rather than just aesthetics. Grace's eyes lit up. "Yes, we could host them here. Your porch is perfect for small groups, and Sophia could do a session on garden design and maintenance." The seed of an idea took root, growing alongside the literal seeds I'd planted in my garden. Over the next few weeks, we sketched out a curriculum, created a basic website, and scheduled our first workshop, Reclaiming Your Space, Home Repair Basics for Women. Word spread quickly through Grace's art school connections and my professional network. Our first session filled within days, 12 women of varying ages, all eager to learn skills that had traditionally been considered men's work. The morning of the workshop, I stood on my porch watching the participants arrive. Some came alone, others in pairs, all carrying notepads and wearing the comfortable clothes we'd recommended. Their excitement was palpable, their nervous energy, reminding me of my own initial uncertainty when I'd first bought this house. "Welcome to Reclaiming Your Space," I began once everyone had settled in chairs arranged in a semicircle on my lawn. "I'm Rebecca, and this is Grace and Sophia. Before we dive into the practical skills, which I promise we'll get to plenty of those, I want to share why this workshop means so much to me." I told them a condensed version of my story, the house, Eric's betrayal, and most importantly, the healing power of physically reclaiming my space. The nodding heads and quiet murmurs of recognition told me these women understood, many from their own experiences. Today is about more than learning to use a drill or patch drywall, I concluded. It's about taking ownership of your environment, understanding that you are capable of creating and maintaining your sanctuary without depending on anyone else. The day unfolded in a series of hands-on stations, basic plumbing repairs with me, wall patching and painting with Grace, and garden planning with Sophia. The women rotated through each area, gaining confidence with every successful task. By late afternoon, when we gathered on the porch for refreshments, the transformation was visible, not in my house, but in their postures, their voices, their willingness to try and even fail without apology. I replaced a faucet last week. One participant, a recently divorced mother of two, shared proudly. "My ex always said it was too complicated for me. Turns out it wasn't complicated at all." Another woman, older and quieter, spoke up. "After my husband died, the house felt like it was falling apart around me. Every dripping faucet, every stuck window was a reminder that I was alone. Learning these skills isn't just practical, it's giving me back control." Their stories resonated deeply, echoing my own journey from helplessness to empowerment. As the workshop concluded and the women departed, many with plans to return for our next session on electrical basics, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My house, which Eric had tried to take from me, had become a place of healing not just for me but for others. That evening, as Grace, Sophia, and I celebrated the success of our first workshop over takeout and wine, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but riding the high of the day's success, I answered without thinking. "Rebecca, it's me, Eric." The sound of his voice sent ice through my veins. I hit the speaker button, gesturing for Grace and Sophia to stay quiet. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I received a letter from your lawyer today. Another restraining order extension? Really, Becca? Don't you think it's time we moved past all this?" His tone was so reasonable, so hurt, as if I were the one being unreasonable. It was the same manipulative approach he'd used our entire lives, positioning himself as the victim of my overreaction rather than the perpetrator of genuine harm. "You tried to steal my house, Eric," I said firmly. "You forged my signature on legal documents. The restraining order is a consequence of your actions, not my inability to move past things." He sighed dramatically. "I made mistakes, I admit. That. But I've changed. I'm in a better place now. I've been sober for 4 months." This was news to me. I hadn't been aware of Eric having substance abuse issues, though it might explain some of his behavior. Still, it changed nothing about our situation. "I'm glad you're doing better," I said carefully, "but that doesn't erase what happened. Please respect the restraining order and stop contacting me." "You're my sister," he pressed, his voice taking on the emotional tone that had worked so effectively in the past. "Family should forgive each other. Mom and Dad would be so sad to see us estranged like this." Before Eric's betrayal, that appeal to our parents' memory would have worked like a charm, sending me into a spiral of guilt. Now, I recognized it, for the manipulation tactic it was. "Our parents would be heartbroken to know what you did," I replied steadily. "And forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation or trust. I wish you well, Eric, but from a distance. Please don't contact me again." I ended the call before he could respond, my hand shaking slightly but my resolve firm. Grace's eyes were wide with admiration. "That was masterful. You didn't give him an inch." Sophia nodded approvingly. "You've come a long way, Rebecca. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect." Their support bolstered me, but a nagging worry remained. Eric's call, coming so soon after the fake tax notice, felt calculated rather than coincidental. I made a note to call my lawyer in the morning to report the violation of the restraining order. The next few weeks passed without incident. Our workshop series gained momentum, with each session filling quickly and a waiting list forming for future dates. Grace and I discussed expanding to a larger venue, perhaps renting space at the community center for more ambitious projects. Work kept me busy as well. The Sustainable Business Initiative was gathering significant interest, with several major clients expressing enthusiasm for our approach. I'd been invited to speak at an industry conference in Chicago, a recognition that would have seemed impossible just a year ago when I was struggling to reclaim my basic sense of security. Life felt full, purposeful, balanced. I'd found a rhythm that included meaningful work, creative outlets, supportive friendships, and personal growth. My house had evolved from a symbol of achievement to a true home, a place of both shelter and expression, security and possibility. Then one morning in late May, I opened my front door to find a small package on the porch. No shipping label, no postmark, just a plain brown box tied with twine. I brought it inside but didn't open it immediately, suspicious of its unexpected appearance. Instead, I called the non-emergency police line, explaining the situation and my concerns given my history with Eric. An officer arrived within the hour, examining the package carefully before opening it with gloved hands. Inside was a framed photograph of our parents on their wedding day, along with a note in Eric's handwriting. "Becca, I found this while cleaning out my storage unit. Thought you should have it. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I'm trying to make amends in the only way I know how. I was wrong. About everything. I'm getting help now, and part of that is taking responsibility for the pain I've caused. You don't need to respond. I just wanted you to have this piece of our history. Eric." The officer documented everything, taking the note as evidence of a restraining order violation. "Would you like to press charges?" she asked. The question gave me pause. The photograph was meaningful, one I'd thought lost during our parents' downsizing years ago. The gesture seemed genuine, a peace offering rather than a threat. But it was still a violation of the legal boundaries I'd established. "I need to think about it," I finally said. "Can I call you tomorrow with my decision?" That evening, I sat on my porch swing, holding the photograph and contemplating my next move. The sun set in a spectacular display of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across my carefully tended garden. A year ago, I would have been torn between family obligation and self-protection, leaning heavily toward the former at my own expense. Now, I saw the situation with clearer eyes. Eric's gesture, while potentially sincere, still demonstrated a disregard for my explicitly stated boundaries. Real change would have included respecting my request for no contact, not finding creative ways to circumvent it. I called the officer the next morning. "I'd like to proceed with reporting the violation," I said. "Not to punish my brother, but to maintain the boundary I've established." It was a small action, but it represented a profound shift in my priorities. I had learned to value my peace of mind above others' expectations or demands, to trust my instincts about what I needed to feel safe and whole. The officer assured me they would handle the matter appropriately, issuing Eric a formal warning rather than immediate legal consequences. It was a balanced response, acknowledging the violation without escalating the situation unnecessarily. Later that week, as I prepared for my trip to Chicago, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The house around me bore little resemblance to the one Eric had attempted to claim. Each room reflected intentional choices I'd made during the reclamation process, each space holding memories of healing rather than betrayal. The foundation remained the same, solid brick and sturdy beams that had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. But the interior had evolved, much like I had. New paint colors that brought me joy, furniture arranged for comfort and conversation, art that spoke to my soul. Most importantly, the energy had shifted. What had once felt violated now felt sacred, protected not just by locks and security systems, but by the strength I'd discovered within myself and the community I'd built around me. As I packed my suitcase for the conference, I realized I no longer felt anxious about leaving my home unattended. Sophia had a spare key for emergencies, Grace would water the plants, and the security system would alert me to any unusual activity. But beyond these practical measures was a deeper confidence, a knowledge that even if something happened in my absence, I had the resilience to handle it. The house that Eric had tried to take from me had become more than just a possession to protect. It had become the physical embodiment of my transformation, from someone who could be manipulated by family expectations to someone who stood firmly in her own truth, from someone who feared confrontation to someone who faced it with calm resolve, from someone defined by others' narratives to someone writing her own story. On my last evening before the trip, I hosted a small dinner for Grace, Sophia, and a few close friends. As we shared food and laughter on the porch that had become the heart of our little community, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the house itself, but for the journey it had prompted, the unraveling that had led to rebuilding, the loss that had created space for something more authentic to grow. "A toast," I said, raising my glass as the fireflies began to emerge in the twilight garden. "To homes that shelter more than our bodies, they shelter our becoming." Grace raised her glass with a knowing smile. "And to the women brave enough to claim them." Sophia, ever wise, added softly, "And to keep claiming them every single day." Our glasses clinked in the gathering dusk, the sound clear and bright like a promise kept, like a declaration of truth. My brother had moved into my house while I was away, then demanded I leave. He forgot who paid the mortgage. But more importantly, he underestimated the woman whose name was on the deed, the woman I had become in fighting to reclaim not just my property, but my power. Chicago greeted me with a brisk wind that carried the scent of Lake Michigan, fresh water, and promise. My hotel room overlooked the gleaming cityscape, a tapestry of glass and steel against a blue horizon. Standing at the window, I felt a quiet confidence I hadn't experienced in professional settings before. The presentation I'd prepared on sustainable business practices wasn't just a career stepping stone. It represented the same principles of resilience and renewal that had transformed my personal life. The conference center buzzed with energy. Hundreds of industry professionals networking, exchanging ideas, and challenging conventional thinking. My session was scheduled for the second day, giving me time to attend other presentations and get a feel for the audience. As I moved through the crowd, collecting business cards and engaging in conversations about innovative approaches, I noticed how easily I navigated spaces that would have intimidated me a year ago. "Rebecca Collins?" A woman approached, hand extended. "I'm Diane Merkel, VP of Operations at Greensphere Consulting. I've been looking forward to your presentation on sustainability initiatives." Her recognition caught me by surprise. "You have?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Your company's approach has been generating buzz in the industry. We're especially interested in how you've integrated community impact assessments into the standard workflow. It's exactly the direction we're trying to move toward." The conversation flowed naturally as we discussed the challenges of balancing profit margins with ethical practices. Before parting, Diane handed me her card with a warm smile. "Let's continue this discussion after your presentation. I think there might be potential for collaboration." Back in my hotel room that evening, preparing for the next day's session, I felt a surge of gratitude. The professional recognition was validating, but what struck me most was how differently I carried myself now. The woman who had once sought validation through others' approval had evolved into someone who stood firmly in her own expertise and worth. My phone chimed with a text from Grace. "Hotel room service and boring cable TV don't hold a candle to why. Porch wine and fireflies. Missing your face already. Knock 'em dead tomorrow." Attached was a photo of my front porch at sunset, the fairy lights we'd strung along the railing glowing softly against the deepening sky. Sophia sat in her usual chair, raising a glass toward the camera. The sight of my home, tended by friends, who had become family, filled me with a sense of rootedness even hundreds of miles away. I responded with a selfie framed against the Chicago skyline, adding, "City lights are pretty, but nothing beats coming home. Give my garden a pep talk for me. The tomato plants were looking moody when I left." The next morning, I dressed with deliberate care. A tailored navy suit that conveyed authority without sacrificing comfort, paired with a vibrant silk scarf Grace had given me after our third workshop. "A pop of courage," she'd called it, the hand-painted pattern reminiscent of our kitchen backsplash mosaic. As I entered the presentation room, scanning the crowd that had gathered, a familiar profile in the back row stopped me cold. Dark hair, sharp jawline, the characteristic tilt of the head. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought Eric had somehow followed me to Chicago. But as the person turned, the resemblance dissolved. Just a stranger with a passing similarity to my brother. The momentary jolt of adrenaline faded, but it left me unsettled. Even here, hundreds of miles from home, the ghost of betrayal could appear without warning. I took a deep breath, centering myself in the present moment rather than past fears. This was my time, my achievement, my story to tell. When introduced, I stepped onto the stage with measured confidence. "Good morning," I began, surveying the room of attentive professionals. "Today I want to talk about sustainability not just as an environmental imperative, but as a fundamental business philosophy. How do we build companies that can weather storms, adapt to changing conditions, and emerge stronger through challenges?" For the next 45 minutes, I shared the framework my team had developed, weaving in case studies and practical applications. The parallels to my personal journey weren't lost on me. The principles of resilience, intentional growth, and systematic recovery applied equally to corporations and individual lives. The question and answer session that followed was lively, with audience members building on my ideas and offering their own experiences. When Diane from Greensphere posed a particularly insightful question about measuring community impact, I found myself inviting her to share her perspective with the room, creating a collaborative dialogue rather than positioning myself as the sole expert. As the session concluded to enthusiastic applause, I felt a sense of professional fulfillment deeper than any I'd experienced before. Several attendees approached with business cards and follow-up questions, including representatives from companies I'd long admired for their ethical practices. Diane waited until the crowd thinned before approaching again. "That was exceptional, Rebecca. Would you be interested in joining me for lunch? I have a proposition I'd like to discuss." Over salads at a restaurant overlooking Millennium Park, Diane outlined her idea. A joint initiative between our companies focused on developing sustainability training for mid-sized businesses. "Your approach resonates with what we're trying to build," she explained. "And frankly, your presentation style brings accessibility to concepts that often feel overwhelming to smaller companies." The opportunity was exactly the kind of expansion I'd been hoping for: meaningful work with broader impact, collaboration with respected industry leaders, and professional growth that aligned with my values. "I'd need to discuss this with my team," I said. "But I'm definitely interested. Would you be open to visiting our offices in Durham for a more formal discussion?" "Absolutely," Diane replied. "I have family in Raleigh anyway. Would next month work?" We scheduled a tentative date, exchanging ideas about the potential scope of collaboration until our lunch plates were cleared. Walking back to the conference center together, Diane mentioned casually, "My brother works in Durham, actually. Tech sector, small world." The comment triggered a flicker of unease, the same instinctive caution I'd developed since Eric's betrayal. But I reminded myself that coincidences existed, that not every connection harbored hidden agendas. The professional opportunity was too valuable to dismiss based on vague anxiety. The remainder of the conference passed in a blur of networking, idea exchanges, and potential connections. By the time I boarded my flight home, my business card supply was depleted and my notebook filled with follow-up items and collaborative possibilities. Landing in Durham felt like releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The familiar airport, the humid Carolina air, the particular quality of late spring light, all signaled homecoming in a visceral way. As my rideshare turned onto my street, anticipation built in my chest, a physical longing to see my house, my garden, my carefully created sanctuary. The vehicle had barely stopped when I spotted something amiss. My front garden, meticulously tended before my departure, showed signs of disturbance: flowers trampled near the walkway, mulch scattered across the lawn. The security camera above the porch was tilted at an odd angle, pointing toward the sky rather than the approach. My pulse quickened as I paid the driver and cautiously approached the house, phone in hand ready to call for help. The front door appeared untouched, locks intact, but the sense of violation hung in the air like a storm front. Someone had been here, deliberately tampering with my security measures. Before inserting my key, I called Sophia. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with greeting. "Rebecca, you're back. How was Chicago?" "Sophia, has anything unusual happened at my house while I was gone?" I kept my voice calm, not wanting to alarm her unnecessarily. A pause, then concern colored her tone. "Not that I noticed, dear. Grace and I checked on things yesterday evening. Everything seemed fine. Why do you ask?" "My front garden is disturbed and the security camera has been moved," I explained, scanning the street for unfamiliar vehicles or watching eyes. "I haven't gone inside yet." "Don't," she said firmly. "Come to my house first. I'm calling Grace. She has a key to your back door. We'll check things together." 20 minutes later, the three of us stood on my porch as a police officer conducted a thorough check of the property. The interior was undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing or out of place. The only evidence of intrusion was the garden damage and the repositioned camera. "Looks like someone may have been casing the place," the officer explained, making notes in her report. "The camera adjustment suggests they were trying to avoid being recorded, but they either got spooked before attempting entry or were just gathering information for a future attempt." "My brother has a restraining order," I said quietly. "He's violated it twice recently." The officer's expression shifted to one of deeper concern. "That changes things. I'll make a note of that in the report. We'll have patrols swing by more frequently for the next few weeks." After she left, Grace insisted on staying the night, transforming the situation from frightening to almost festive with her characteristic ability to find light in darkness. She ordered delivery from my favorite restaurant, opened a bottle of wine, and launched into entertaining stories about neighborhood happenings during my absence. "Mrs. Harrington's cat escaped again," she recounted, gesturing dramatically. Ended. "Up in the Hendersons' backyard, terrorizing their prize-winning koi. Sophia and I spent an entire afternoon helping search, only to find the little monster asleep in your garden shed. Which reminds me, you really should replace that rickety..." Luck. Her chatter was exactly what I needed, grounding me in the ordinary details of home rather than the looming shadow of potential threat. By the time we turned in for the night, the house felt reclaimed, filled once again with laughter and friendship, rather than fear. The next morning, I replaced the damaged security camera with an upgraded model and added 2 additional cameras covering blind spots around the property. The security company sent a technician to evaluate the entire system, resulting in enhanced motion detectors and a direct connection to their monitoring center. "This is one of the most comprehensive residential systems we install," the technician commented as he finalized the setup. "Most people don't invest in this level of protection unless they've experienced a serious break-in." "I'm not most people," I replied simply, "and prevention is better than recovery." At work, I dove back into my regular responsibilities while also preparing for Diane's visit to discuss the potential collaboration. My colleagues responded enthusiastically to the opportunities I'd developed at the conference, particularly the Green Sphere connection. "This could be transformative for our sustainability division," my director noted during our planning meeting. "Rebecca, you'll take point on this, of course. It's your vision that got us here." The vote of confidence warmed me, a professional validation that paralleled my personal growth. Just as I'd reclaimed my home from Eric's attempt at appropriation, I'd established myself as a leader in a field where women often struggled for recognition. 2 weeks after my return from Chicago, as preparations for Diane's visit were finalizing, I received an unexpected email from E. Collins Mapletech. Come subject, professional inquiry. "Ms. Collins, I'm reaching out regarding your company's sustainability initiatives, which have garnered attention in industry circles. As the new Director of Community Engagement at Mapletech, I'm interested in exploring how we might integrate similar practices. Would you be available for a consultation? Respectfully, Eric Collins, Director of Community Engagement, Mapletech Industries." My blood ran cold. The email was carefully worded, professionally distanced, with no explicit acknowledgement of our relationship. To anyone else reading it, it would appear to be a legitimate business inquiry. But the timing couldn't be coincidental. Right after, my professional visibility had increased through the conference, right after someone had tampered with my home security. Eric had found a new angle, a way to insert himself into my life that circumvented the restraining order by placing our interaction in a professional context. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a brief note explaining the situation, then blocked the address from my work email. That evening, as a precaution, I researched Mapletech Industries. It was indeed a legitimate company, recently established in Durham's growing tech corridor. Their website listed Eric Collins as director, of community engagement, complete with a professional headshot showing my brother in a tailored suit, his expression serious and corporate. The discovery was unsettling on multiple levels. Either Eric had genuinely secured a professional position, unlikely given his spotty employment history, or he had created an elaborate facade to legitimize contact. Either way, it represented an escalation in his attempts to reinsert himself into my life. I called Uncle Jack, who had always seen through Eric's manipulations more clearly than anyone. "Maple Tech. Never heard of them," he said after I explained the situation. "But that doesn't mean much in today's startup landscape. Want me to do some digging? Would you?" The relief of sharing this burden was immediate. I don't want to seem paranoid, but after what happened with the house... "You're not paranoid, Rebecca." Jack's voice was firm. "You're being vigilant based on established patterns. There's a difference. Let me make some calls, see what I can find out about this company and Eric's supposed position there." The next morning, my lawyer called with her assessment. "The email itself doesn't technically violate the restraining order," she explained. "It's framed as a business communication without personal references. But given the context and timing, we can file it as supporting documentation if there are further violations." "So there's nothing I can do?" The frustration in my voice was evident. "I didn't say that," she replied carefully. "I'd recommend documenting everything, including the security camera tampering, which we can definitely add to the violation record. And I've drafted a formal cease and desist letter to be sent to both Eric personally and to Mapletech's corporate address, making it clear that any contact, regardless of purported purpose, is unwelcome and potentially actionable." The approach felt empowering, proactive rather than reactive, establishing clear boundaries while placing Eric's behavior in an official record. I authorized her to send the letters immediately. Uncle Jack called later that day with his findings. "Mapletech is real, but barely," he reported. "Incorporated 6 months ago, minimal online presence, no actual office space. They're working out of a co-working facility. The founder is Jason Merkel, who has a legitimate background in software development but limited management experience." The name struck a chord. Merkel? Like Diane Merkel from Greensphere? "Could be coincidence," Jack said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But here's the kicker. Eric was hired 3 weeks ago, right after I'm guessing he received your lawyer's latest warning, and his position was created specifically for him." The pieces began to align in a disturbing pattern. "You think he's using this company to create a professional reason to contact me?" "Either that, or..." Jack hesitated. "Or what?" "Or someone else is using him to get to you. You mentioned your house has increased in value substantially since you bought it, right? And your neighborhood is becoming one of the most desirable in Durham?" The implication sent a chill through me. "You think this is still about my house? That someone is helping Eric try to claim it?" "I think it's worth considering all possibilities," Jack replied carefully, "especially given the timing of the security camera tampering and this sudden professional outreach." The conversation left me deeply unsettled. I'd been focused on Eric as an individual threat, driven by entitlement and opportunism. The possibility of a more coordinated effort, potentially involving others with financial motives, added layers of complexity to an already difficult situation. That evening, I sat on my porch with Grace and Sophia, sharing the latest developments over glasses of iced tea. The spring twilight filled my garden with soft purple shadows, the scent of jasmine heavy in the humid air. The peaceful setting stood in stark contrast to the tumult of my thoughts. "Wait," Grace interrupted when I mentioned the Merkel connection. "Diane Merkel? From Greensphere? The one who's coming to your office next week?" I nodded, watching her expression shift from confusion to concern. "That feels like too much coincidence," she said slowly. "Have you Googled her? Verified she is who she says she is?" The suggestion made perfect sense. Yet somehow I hadn't thought to perform this basic check. I pulled out my phone and searched for Diane Merkel Greensphere Consulting. The results were sparse, a LinkedIn profile with minimal information, created just 2 months ago. No photo, no mention of her in Greensphere's public materials or press releases, no professional articles or conference presentations under her name. "This doesn't look right," I murmured, scrolling through the limited results. Someone with her supposed position should have more of a digital footprint. Sophia, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Rebecca, dear, I think it's time to consider that you may be facing something more coordinated than just your brother's opportunism. This level of deception suggests planning and resources beyond what Eric could manage alone." Her assessment matched my growing unease. "But why go to these lengths? What's the end game?" "Your property has nearly doubled in value since you purchased it," Sophia pointed out. "The entire neighborhood has become prime real estate. There's significant financial incentive, especially if someone believes they can manipulate legal ownership through family connections." Grace nodded, adding, "And your professional success makes you a more valuable target. If someone could gain access to your company's client information or proprietary methodologies through this fake collaboration." The implications were disturbing. My home and my career, the two aspects of my life I'd worked hardest to build and protect, were potentially under threat from a coordinated effort that included my own brother. "I need to alert my company's security team," I decided, already drafting the email in my mind, "and cancel this meeting with Diane, whoever she really is." "And beef up your personal security," Grace added firmly, "starting with someone staying here with you until this is resolved." I started to protest, but Sophia cut me off gently. "Independence doesn't mean facing danger alone, Rebecca. Accepting help when needed is its own kind of strength." Their concern touched me deeply. From feeling isolated during Eric's first attempt to take my house, I had built a network of genuine support, people who recognized threats to my well-being and stood beside me without question. "You're right," I conceded, "but I'm not just going to hide and hope this goes away. If someone is targeting me, I want to know who, why, and how to stop them permanently." The determination in my voice surprised even me. The Rebecca of a year ago would have retreated, overwhelmed by conflict and uncertain of her right to fight back. The woman speaking now recognized her worth clearly enough to defend it without apology. "That's our girl," Grace said with a fierce grin. "So what's the plan?" Under the soft glow of porch lights, surrounded by friends who had become family, I began to outline a strategy, not just for protection, but for counteroffensive. If Eric and his mysterious allies wanted to play elaborate games, they were about to discover I was no longer the passive player they remembered. "First," I said, my resolve strengthening with each word, "we need to find out exactly who we're dealing with. And then we make it abundantly clear that messing with this house, and its owner, is the worst mistake they could possibly make." The morning after our strategy session on the porch, I woke with a clarity that felt almost physical, like emerging from fog into brilliant sunshine. The uncertainty that had shadowed me since discovering Eric's potential corporate scheme had crystallized into purposeful resolve. This was no longer just about defending what was mine. It was about ending the cycle of manipulation permanently. My first call was to my company's security director, Michael Reeves, a former cybersecurity specialist with military experience. His response to my situation was immediate and comprehensive. "I'll run full background checks on both Diane Merkel and this Mapletech outfit," he assured me. "In the meantime, we'll postpone the meeting using a plausible business excuse rather than letting on that we suspect anything. Better to gather information while they think we're still in the dark." "Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the discretion." "Of course. And Rebecca," he paused, his tone shifting to something more personal. "I've worked with you for 3 years now. Your instincts about people are usually spot on. If something feels wrong here, I'm inclined to trust that. His confidence bolstered my own. After disconnecting, I moved to the next phase of our plan, documenting everything related to Eric's pattern of behavior, creating a comprehensive timeline that my lawyer could use to seek stronger legal protection. Uncle Jack had arrived the previous evening, insisting on staying in my guest room until the situation resolved. I found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee mug in hand, already deep into his own investigation. "Morning, Becca," he greeted, using the childhood nickname I'd once disliked, but now found comforting coming from him. "I've been doing some digging on Jason Merkel, the supposed founder of Mapletech. Interesting character." I poured myself coffee and joined him. "What did you find?" "He exists, for starters." Jack turned his screen toward me, showing a LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot of a man in his late 30s. Software engineer who bounced between several mid-sized tech companies before striking out on his own. No obvious connection to Eric that I can find, except he clicked to another tab, showing a social media post from 3 years ago, a group photo at what appeared to be a charity golf tournament. In the background, barely noticeable until Jack zoomed in, stood Eric alongside Jason Merkel, both smiling widely, drinks in hand. "How did you even find this?" I asked, impressed and slightly unnerved by Jack's investigative skills. He shrugged modestly. "Old habits from my investigative journalism days. The internet never truly forgets anything, especially if you know where to look." "So they knew each other before," I mused, studying the image. "That confirms Eric didn't just randomly land this job." "There's more," Jack continued, switching to another screen. I checked property records. 6 months ago, Jason Merkel purchased 3 lots in the development just north of your neighborhood, the one they're marketing as luxury urban living or whatever buzzword they're using these days. The connection clicked instantly. Where property values depend heavily on the desirability of adjacent neighborhoods. "Exactly," Jack nodded grimly. "Including yours, which has become one of the most sought after in the area. If someone wanted to accelerate gentrification in their development area, they might target established properties nearby," I finished, the larger picture becoming clearer. "But that still doesn't explain why they'd focus specifically on my house, or involve Eric." Jack leaned back, fingers steepled thoughtfully. "I have a theory about that, but I need to verify a few things first. In the meantime," Grace texted. She's stopping by later with some interesting information from her contact at the city planning office. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. I worked remotely, maintaining normal business operations while waiting for updates from Michael's security investigation. Grace arrived around noon, practically vibrating with the energy of someone holding valuable intelligence. "You're not going to believe this," she announced, spreading file folders across my dining table. "Remember my friend Layla from the art department? Her partner works in city planning. When I mentioned your address, just casually asking about property values in the area, she got this weird look and said, 'That's in the proposed Heritage District, right?'" "Heritage District," I repeated, confused. "I've never heard anything about that." "Because it hasn't been publicly announced yet," Grace explained, pointing to a map in one of the folders. "The city is considering designating your entire neighborhood as a historical preservation zone. If approved, property values would increase significantly, but more importantly, all exterior modifications would require special permits and have to maintain historical accuracy." Uncle Jack whistled low. That would put a serious damper on any developer wanting to tear down existing structures for modern high-density housing. "Exactly," Grace confirmed. "And guess who's been quietly lobbying against the heritage designation?" She dramatically flipped to another document. Mapletech Industries, through their Community Engagement Division, currently headed by one Eric Collins. The pieces aligned with disturbing clarity. "So Eric isn't just after my house for himself," I said slowly. He's working with developers who want to prevent the heritage designation and acquire properties for redevelopment. That's what it looks like, Grace agreed. According to Layla's partner, several homeowners in the neighborhood have reported unusual contacts, everything from aggressive purchase offers to strange complaints filed with the housing association. Your street in particular seems to be of interest because it's the boundary line for the proposed heritage zone. The revelation added layers to what had initially seemed a simple case of Eric's opportunism. This wasn't just personal. It was business with significant financial implications. The targeting felt less random but somehow more violating, knowing multiple parties had collaborated to manipulate my property situation. My phone rang, interrupting our discussion. Michael Reeves's name flashed on the screen. "Rebecca," he said without preamble. "I've got information on your Diane Merkel. She doesn't exist, at least not as a VP at Greensphere. There is a Diane Merkel registered in North Carolina, but she's a 68-year-old retired school teacher currently living in an assisted living facility in Asheville. So someone is using her identity," I concluded. "Looks that way. And here's where it gets interesting. I ran facial recognition on the photo from the business card she gave you. The woman is actually Christina Merkel, Jason's wife. She has a background in real estate, not sustainability consulting." The deception was so blatant it momentarily took my breath away. They really thought I wouldn't verify any of this before a major business collaboration? "People like this count on others taking them at face value," Michael replied. "Professional confidence often passes for legitimacy in initial encounters. If they could get access to your company's client data or proprietary methods under the guise of collaboration." "Industrial espionage," I murmured. "Possibly. Or simply gathering information to strengthen their position in whatever real estate play they're making. Either way, I've alerted our legal team. The meeting is officially canceled, and we're documenting everything for potential criminal charges." After thanking Michael, I shared the update with Jack and Grace. Their reactions mirrored my own outrage, but Jack's expression soon shifted to something more calculating. "This gives us leverage," he pointed out. "They don't know that we know. We could use that." "How so?" I asked. "Instead of just playing defense, canceling meetings, filing reports, we could set a trap, gather evidence of their intentions directly." Grace leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Jack outlined a counter-strategy so audacious it initially seemed reckless. Rather than canceling the meeting with the fake Diane Merkel entirely, we would proceed under controlled conditions, with recording devices and witnesses present. The goal: get her to reveal the true purpose of the approach, providing concrete evidence of conspiracy. "It's risky," I admitted, considering the potential complications. "If they realize we're onto them." "That's why we create multiple layers of protection," Jack assured me. "Legal witnesses, recording equipment, security personnel nearby. This isn't about putting you in danger. It's about ending this situation definitively." The plan took shape over the next 24 hours, with each of us contributing elements based on our particular skills. Grace, with her artistic eye, helped stage the meeting room with strategically placed recording devices disguised as ordinary objects. Jack coordinated with my lawyer to ensure all surveillance was legal and admissible as evidence. I prepared a carefully scripted conversation designed to elicit revealing statements without alerting Christina to our suspicions. The morning of the scheduled meeting, I dressed with particular care, a power suit that conveyed authority without flashiness, simple jewelry, hair pulled back in a professional style. The outfit was armor of sorts, helping me embody the confident executive who couldn't be easily manipulated. "Remember," my lawyer advised during our final review, "the goal is documentation, not confrontation. Let her reveal their intentions naturally through conversation. Don't push too hard or show your hand early." I nodded, fighting the nervous energy that threatened to overtake my practiced calm. What if she doesn't say anything incriminating? Then we still have the fact that she's impersonating someone else in a business context, which is fraud, she reassured me. But based on what we know about their operation, I suspect she'll reveal more than she intends once she believes you're considering collaboration. The company conference room had been carefully prepared. Recording devices hidden in the decorative centerpiece, the digital picture frame, even the seemingly ordinary box of tissues. Security personnel were stationed nearby, monitoring live feeds. My lawyer waited in an adjacent office, ready to intervene if necessary. At precisely 10 a.m., the receptionist announced Christina Merkel's arrival. I took a deep breath, centered myself in the knowledge that I was prepared and protected, and walked out to greet my brother's co-conspirator. "Diane," I said warmly, extending my hand to the elegant woman in the reception area. "Wonderful to see you again. I hope your trip from Chicago was pleasant." Christina Merkel, playing the role of Diane, smiled confidently. "Very smooth, thank you. I'm excited to continue our conversation about potential collaboration." She looked exactly like her business card photo, mid-40s, expensively dressed, with the polished demeanor of someone accustomed to executive-level interactions. Nothing in her manner suggested deception or ulterior motives. Had I not known the truth, I would have accepted her professional persona without question. I led her to the conference room, engaging in casual conversation about the local area. "Have you had a chance to explore Durham at all?" I asked, watching carefully. For any slip in her Chicago-based cover story. "Not much yet," she replied smoothly. "Though I understand your neighborhood is particularly charming. Craftsman Homes, isn't it? My brother mentioned the area is developing quite a reputation." The deliberate mention of my neighborhood confirmed our suspicions, but I maintained my friendly demeanor. "It's a wonderful community. I've been there about 3 years now. Bought my place just before property values really took off." A flicker of something, interest, calculation, passed across her features before she masked it with professional courtesy. "Lucky timing. Real estate is always about location and timing, isn't it? Speaking of timing, I'm very interested in how your sustainability initiatives might align with our community development approach." For the next 30 minutes, I let her lead the conversation, carefully noting how she probed for specifics about my company's client relationships, particularly those with property development firms. Her questions, while framed as relevant to sustainability practices, consistently circled back to real estate implications and community rezoning impacts. "One area where I see particular synergy," she ventured, after I had shared appropriately vague information about our methodologies, "is in historical designation strategies. Some communities find preservation requirements overly restrictive for economic growth. I understand your neighborhood might be facing similar tensions?" The directness of the question, so clearly unrelated to GreenSphere's supposed sustainability focus, was the opening I needed. "That's interesting you should mention that," I replied, keeping my tone conversational. "There have been rumors about a heritage designation. Personally, I see tremendous value in preservation. My own home has such character, something my brother appreciates as well, even if his approach to showing it was unconventional." The deliberate mention of my brother caused a barely perceptible shift in her posture, a slight stiffening, a momentary pause in her practiced smile. "Your brother?" she asked, working to maintain her casual tone. "Eric Collins," I clarified, watching her reaction closely. "I believe he works with your brother-in-law at Maple Tech. Small world, isn't it? Though I suppose in specialized industries, connections often overlap." Her recovery was impressive, but not perfect. "Oh, of course. I'd forgotten that connection. Jason may have mentioned something, though I don't know Eric personally." "Interesting," I commented mildly. "I could have sworn I saw you dropping him off at my neighbor's house last month. Perhaps I was mistaken." This fabricated detail, a calculated risk, produced the reaction we needed. Christina's professional composure cracked momentarily, uncertainty flashing across her features as she tried to determine whether she'd been observed in activities that would expose their scheme. That must have been someone else, she managed, reaching for her water glass with a hand that trembled slightly. About the collaboration framework, I've prepared some preliminary thoughts on integration points. I allowed her to redirect the conversation, noting how her questions became more focused on my property specifically, its size, any renovation restrictions, my long-term plans for remaining in the neighborhood. Each inquiry further confirmed the true purpose of this meeting had nothing to do with business collaboration. After an hour of this carefully orchestrated dance, I concluded the meeting with deliberate ambiguity. This has been enlightening, Diane. I'll need to consult with my team about next steps, of course, but I see potential here. Wonderful, she replied, composure fully restored. And perhaps we could continue some of these discussions in a less formal setting? I'd love to see the neighborhood you've mentioned. Maybe over dinner at your place. To get a feel for the community context, of course. The brazenness of the request, trying to gain access to my home under the guise of business, hospitality, confirmed everything we'd suspected about their intentions. That's an interesting suggestion, I said, rising to indicate the meeting's conclusion. I'll consider it as part of our next steps. My assistant will be in touch about scheduling. As I escorted her out, maintaining professional courtesy until she disappeared into a waiting car, a profound sense of validation washed over me. The conspiracy we had pieced together from circumstantial evidence had just confirmed itself through Christina's own behavior and questions. Back in the conference room, my lawyer emerged from the monitoring room with an expression of grim satisfaction. Well done, Rebecca. We got exactly what we needed. Clear evidence of fraudulent representation and questionable intent regarding your property. What happens now? I asked, the adrenaline of the encounter beginning to ebb. Now we compile everything. This meeting, the fake identity, Eric's involvement, the heritage designation lobbying, and present it to both civil authorities and the State Bar Association. What they've done crosses several legal boundaries, from identity fraud to corporate espionage to harassment. The systematic dismantling of Eric's scheme began that afternoon. My lawyer filed comprehensive reports with local law enforcement, the district attorney's office, and professional oversight boards. Michael's security team provided digital evidence confirming Christina's true identity and documenting the fraudulent approach to my company. Rather than confronting Eric directly, which would have simply given him the attention and engagement he sought, we allowed the legal processes to unfold methodically. Within days, Mapletech received formal notices of investigation from multiple authorities. Their hastily established office emptied overnight, but not before financial records were secured by investigators. What emerged from the investigations painted a picture more calculated than we'd initially suspected. Jason Merkel had been purchasing properties throughout Durham using various shell companies, focusing on neighborhoods adjacent to proposed heritage districts. By preventing preservation designations, he could redevelop these areas for maximum profit, replacing historic homes with high-density luxury housing. Eric, with his family connection to me and history of financial opportunism, had been recruited specifically to target my property, first through his direct attempt to claim ownership, then through the more sophisticated corporate approach when that failed. My home, sitting on the boundary of the proposed heritage zone, represented a strategic acquisition that could potentially undermine the entire preservation effort. The scheme collapsed spectacularly once exposed. Jason Merkel faced multiple fraud charges and professional censure. Christina was charged with identity theft and corporate espionage. Several other conspiracy participants, including a city planning office employee who had leaked confidential information about the heritage designation, were identified and faced appropriate consequences. And Eric, my brother, whose betrayal had started this entire saga, found himself named in multiple legal actions, his carefully constructed professional facade crumbling as quickly as it had appeared. The restraining order against him was extended indefinitely, with additional provisions specifically prohibiting any attempt at communication through third parties or corporate entities. 3 weeks after our staged meeting with Christina, I received official notification that the heritage designation for my neighborhood had been approved, protecting the historic character of our community for generations to come. The letter arrived the same day as a more personal communication, a handwritten note from Uncle Jack, who had returned to Virginia once the immediate crisis had passed. Becca, some battles change us more than others. This one showed you something important, not just about Eric or those developers, but about yourself. The woman who fought for her home this time didn't just defend her property. She protected her community and exposed corruption that would have harmed many others. I'm prouder than I can say to have witnessed your transformation from someone who doubted her right to stand firm into someone who stands not just for herself, but for what's right. That's a rare evolution. Your parents would be proud too. Not because you won, but because of how you won, with integrity, intelligence, and a refusal to be victimized again. Call anytime you need me, though I suspect you've got all the strength you need right where you are. With love and admiration, Jack. The note brought unexpected tears, not from sadness or lingering trauma, but from recognition of the truth in his words. The journey that had begun with Eric's first betrayal had indeed transformed me in ways I was only beginning to fully appreciate. That evening, as summer settled over Durham in waves of honeysuckle-scented warmth, I hosted an impromptu gathering on my porch. Grace brought her homemade sangria, Sophia contributed her famous lemon bars, and neighbors from throughout the newly designated Heritage District stopped by to celebrate our community's victory. Conversation flowed easily, touching on renovation plans, garden competitions, and the upcoming neighborhood festival. No one directly mentioned the developer scheme that had been thwarted, yet there was an undercurrent of shared accomplishment. A collective recognition that something valuable had been preserved. As twilight deepened into dusk, string lights twinkling in the gathering darkness, Grace raised her glass. "To Rebecca," she announced to the assembled neighbors, who reminded us all that homes are worth fighting for, not just the buildings, but the communities they create. The toast brought warm applause and genuine smiles. Looking around at these people who had moved from strangers to neighbors to friends, I felt a sense of belonging deeper than I'd ever experienced. This was home in its truest sense, not just the house I'd purchased and protected, but the connections I'd built within its walls and beyond. Later, after the last guest had departed and quiet settled over the neighborhood, I sat alone on my porch swing, listening to the night sounds of crickets and distant wind chimes. The home behind me stood solid and secure, free from threats both immediate and lurking. The garden before me, tended with care through seasons of growth and dormancy, reflected my own journey, from vulnerable seedling to deeply rooted strength. Eric had moved into my house while I was away, then demanded I leave when I returned. He had forgotten who paid the mortgage, who held the deed, who had earned this place through years of discipline and determination. But more significantly, he had underestimated what this home truly meant to me, not just shelter or investment, but identity and purpose. In trying to take what was mine, he had unwittingly given me something far more valuable: the discovery of my own resilience, the formation of genuine community, and the profound understanding that some foundations can never be shaken once properly built. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes, their melody carrying across the quiet street. In that peaceful moment, I felt complete ownership of this place. Not just legally or financially, but spiritually and emotionally. The house, once merely a structure of wood and brick, had become the physical manifestation of my personal transformation. Eric had forgotten who paid the mortgage. I would never forget what that payment had truly purchased. Not just a house, but a home. Not just an address, but an identity. Not just a property, but a life authentically and courageously lived. And that, ultimately, was the victory that mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.